Welcome to Still Growing in Grace. I'm Mike Zanker. Join me and other amazing guests as we explore and discover better, hope-filled perspectives on biblical texts and difficult themes. Prepare to expand your understanding of God's love and amazing grace. Growing in Grace Ministries Canada and Hope Fellowship, as well as Eastside Church, invite you to enjoy today's program as we dig deeper into what it means to be still growing in grace. All right, welcome back to Still Growing in Grace, Christmas topic, part 2. And last time was a lot of fun, but I want to dig in even more. There were some topics that half of you guys were, you have a list there and didn't get a chance to get through it. So let's see, what else did you guys have on unpacking this Christmas theme and finding a better way to proceed?
Unwrapping. Come on, Mike. Get it together. It's sitting right in front of you, man.
It's been a rough day. Come on.
Very good. No, I think we talked about just a lot of the just sentiments around Christmas in our last conversation, and I thought that was really, really good. And the concept of the Incarnation, which I'm sure we'll jump into a little bit more. One of the things I don't mind talking about, and I think would be kind of insightful for a lot of people, are some of the nuances of the Christmas story that either do get mildly debated. Not that we need to exacerbate those, but I think it can bring clarity and comfort to people to understand some of those little nuances, especially around, like, why is it December 25th? Or, who were those strange guys that showed up with gifts, and what was that all about? And there's just so much to unpack with every single one of these. Honestly, we probably could do several more weeks, and we don't need to, but it's just such a there's just so many little elements that are just so much fun to play with Christmas. And I don't say that lightly. I just mean that I think authentically, like, as much as Christmas is this season where we get to maybe get a little toy or something fun we get to play with, I think the story of Christmas from a theological standpoint really has some of the same elements to it.
Yeah. I heard that the fourth wise man came with fruitcake and was kicked out. Terrible.
What do you guys got?
Well, not controversial. This is not one of those issues. I just think that since have just came through a political season.
For what it's worth, we have no clue what happens because we're recording it prior to that. So we have no idea.
Don't tell anybody.
Don't say. But you have such a contrast in the power structures of the world at the Christmas season, when you have Herod with his thirst for power and his wanting to hang on to power, so much so that he resorts to such horrific violence of killing little babies and infants. And I just think it speaks into how the Lord Jesus comes in this humble fashion, and he ascends to power through service, through forgiveness, through giving of himself. It's such a contrast to the powers of the world versus who our God is. And so that's not that that's really a controversial thing. It's just one of those side elements to the Christmas story that I think is speaks volumes to.
I don't know if it's the side element. It may be the whole element when we read, maybe the main nugget that we're supposed to draw from it.
Well, we forget that we think we're so advanced in our culture today. Oh, we got all these problems, political problems, war problems, and yet the Christmas story is surrounded by it. Remember why Mary and Joseph were going to Bethlehem. They were forced to go there to do a census, which means the military was everywhere to quash any small uprisings. There was guards and Roman regiments everywhere. So the idea of the soldiers, there was more soldiers everywhere, than normal. So
it's an oppressed society.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're waiting for a savior to save them from Rome. Most
from the empire.
Yep.
Yeah.
We'll definitely cover that at Easter.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah. Oh man. Some of the nuance. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I'm good.
Oh, I say, does anybody know why December 25th is theoretically the Christmas day?
I forget. I heard some things, but now I
Yeah.
don't
There's a
know.
lot of different reasons, and they get
Yeah.
this Ishtar thing and the Babylonian, and I think there's some elements. I mean, it's obviously aligned with the winter solstice very
Right.
closely,
Right.
right? And just
Yeah.
like Easter is aligned very much with the vernal equinox, right?
Well, it
So
wasn't
we
born
have
December
these.
25th. That's for sure.
Again, yeah, absolutely. That's just an arbitrary date.
Yeah.
Well, or it could have been there's different arguments for different things,
Yeah.
but there's actually a really interesting variable that lines. Listen, I don't think it's any. It's not an accident that a lot of our holidays align with the stars, the
Yeah.
seasons, which also align with a lot of pagan holidays. And
Which is why the wise men were able to find these guys.
yeah,
It was connected to that.
all of it's connected, right? But point being is, as Christianity spread through Europe and Asia and Africa and other places, these are events that are, again, transcendent to human culture. And if we have an important date and they have an important date, you can see how things can amalgamate, and Christmas trees become, signs of evergreen life in Nordic society, and we just kind of bring it in and throw some Jesus stuff on it, and that's all. And same thing with Easter and fertility and stuff like that. That these we don't need to be scared of that. I don't think, like, that's
No.
not a bad thing that these things have cross pollinated in different traditions, and that we've attached things. I don't think that, but one of the reasons, and I don't know if it's the tail wagging the dog or not. That it doesn't really matter. But one of the elements that I understand it to be, and I think this is fairly accurate, is in early Christian culture, talking the first 300 to 400 years of Christianity, and probably even prior to that in Judaism, and even in Roman lore, there was a belief, and we got to understand, you're dealing with more primitive cultures that just don't understand certain elements of how things work. That if you were a martyr, your martyrdom sets you in a more higher profile of person, right? Or of
On the other side.
death. Yeah, on the other side. And that your martyrdom is actually a sign. And that in ancient cultures, true martyrs who are deified are seen and known to have their conception take place between their mother and their father, in this case, God and Mary, on the date of their death, their conception. And if you just think about that, the Easter date would be the conception of Jesus, and you draw the clock out, it puts it right at around December 25th, 9 months later. So sometimes we overcomplicate things, and we just have to understand that the way they worked is they used Jesus's death as a conceptual idea of his conception. I said that right, yeah. Got redundant, but intentionally redundant. And then you just do the math, and then this leads to a point where they would have done 40 weeks out, and a baby would have been born, right? It's way more simple when you think of it that way. And then you add the layers of, winter solstice and all the other stuff that happen communally, and that's it. It's not that complicated, and we don't have to be that scared of it.
Because Easter changes all the time, right? Because it's based on
Easter
the moon
moves,
sequence.
but it's always around the vernal
Right,
equinox.
yes.
Again, yeah, they used the lunar calendar back then, so it's still around the same time.
Well,
December,
I just learned something there. I hadn't heard that.
Isn't that cool? Isn't that
cool.
way less complicated than a lot
Yeah,
of people
that's
try
pretty
to
cool.
make it out to be? And it
That's
goes,
pretty cool.
it kind of makes sense where a simpler culture would have understood it and just said, hey, if you're a martyr, this means this. And again, it doesn't have any bearing on reality. It's just how they understood martyrdom.
I think it's important to have another menu item to understand it. And to take away the idea that the church has legislated these dates because these are accurate pieces of information, and to hold that lightly, because our Western concept of these dates are very different than our Eastern friends. Like if you take a look at the Orthodox Church, they begin to celebrate their Christmas in January, and they do 12 days of Christmas. So wait, what's going on here? We don't have the exclusive answer for all of this. And so to argue and say someone's wrong in their story is probably unwise. Just sit and listen. lighten up and just listen.
Yeah, you mentioned it earlier about the stars and the magi.
Yeah.
Also, that's one of my other favorite elements. I mean, the prophetic depth happening with these magicians, right? Which is where the word magi comes from. There's so many different philosophies on where these guys actually came from and who they were. I kind of ascribe to one. I keep a really loose hand with it. I'm not dogmatic about it in any regard, but the more I've prayed about it, the more I've just kind of pondered on it. When you go back and you read the Old Testament and Daniel, right?
Oh, you're going to do this, aren't you?
In captivity.
Steal my thunder.
Daniel had 3 buddies. You probably heard the story. They were, I think, asparaguses. I've seen the movie before, and they got thrown into Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. There's also these little kid stories. And they get thrown into a fiery furnace, and there's a 4th person in there, and Nebuchadnezzar, and all that kind of fun stuff. But in more just a broad, simple analysis, Daniel and his 3 advisors were considered magi. Yeah. They were magicians. They were counselors. They were fortune tellers. You can call them whatever you want.
Astrologers too, right?
Absolutely, astrologers. Yeah, and
that's
this is when
element.
Israel was in captivity in Babylon, right? And they served a purpose, and these men elevated into certain roles. And, Israel ultimately came back and reestablished in the land that Jesus was in Jerusalem and Bethlehem, Judea. But elements of the Jewish traditions would have remained all over for centuries. And I think it's just the simple, again, this is just the simple, like, hey, let's not overcomplicate that. The same prophecies that Daniel would have written that we capture in our scripture, many of those would have been retained in scrolls in the Babylonian archives. And there would have been a lineage of magi's and astrologers and fortune seekers who were looking for some sort of event that had been foretold of in the Jewish world that had been recorded in Babylon, why these magi were there, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego included, right? I think it's just it's a very easy step to see how there would have been people waiting and watching, possibly more observant and more aligned than even the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Romans and what was going on. There was some celestial event. They caught wind of it. They show up thinking that everybody's got it figured out. Nobody has it figured out. And then the whole hair thing. And they bring interesting 3 gifts. And we assign the fact that there were 3 magi because there's 3 gifts, but there's actually nothing that says there were 3 magi.
Not at all.
It's probably a caravan.
Yes, for that kind of gold,
hundreds of people
you got to protect that. Come on,
trekked across some sort of Middle Eastern desert, and they'd have their concubines. They would have. I mean, it would have been a spectacle, right? They would have had their whole caravan trekking, showing up at Herod's front door, and he's like, you can understand his probably apprehension. A lot different than 3 guys showing up versus 300 people showing up going, where's the party? And he's like, what are you talking about? So it gives a little more context to why he would have had.
And the religious leaders knew.
Yeah.
They
knew. They go back and they start digging in their old, files going, where's this guy born? And he's like, Bethlehem. And that's what eventually they do catch up to Jesus, not the night of his birth, by the way, as our nativities probably capture. They show up. Jesus is probably a toddler by this time.
Well, it says he's at a house.
He's had three gifts: frankincense, gold, and myrrh.
But wait, and again, there's myrrh.
There's myrrh. And it's just so interesting. You're giving a tot. Now, I've had 2. You guys have all had children. I don't think these are 3 gifts I give toddler. Like, maybe a little gold, but I mean, they don't really know what to do with it. But the depth of prophecy in each one of these gifts is really the point of the story. Frankincense, incense, is used in priestly duties, right? It's what we're burning. It's a symbol of the high priest, or the symbol of some depth of understanding about the knowledge of God that will be in this child. You have gold, which gold was an extremely precious resource, but only again reserved for royalty, for the line of a king. And so they bring in a worldly, kingly gift in the gold. And then myrrh is the most bizarre of the three because this is a perfume, a very, very fragrant and expensive and potent perfume whose primary purpose was embalming dead people. Bringing a toddler an embalming fluid is really awkward.
That's weird.
Isn't that weird?
It's like showing up with a
Someone said it's
casket.
like bringing a coffin to a baby shower.
Oh,
Exactly.
no.
Exactly. And yet, once you understand that Jesus was literally born for the way of the cross, and these people were honoring that and that progression in his infancy, again, this is the wow factor that's happening in this story that gets lost sometimes on us culturally, just because we don't really think about what those things are and how they would have been taken by a first century Jewish family who was broke.
Mhm. Yeah.
Those are also probably the elements that allowed them to escape to Egypt because
Bingo.
they had funding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I rant?
Go.
Oh my goodness. If you guys got something else, jump in before me because this little part's fun because I thought you were going there and you didn't. I think those magi, astrologers, astronomers, they're all the same. They weren't the bad fortune telling kind of people you write off today. Not like that at all. I think they were disciples of Daniel, of the line of Daniel. There was a dream that Nebuchadnezzar had that Daniel had to interpret. And to me, it's one of the most prophetic dreams that it kills end times theology big time, the really bad stuff, but it points to the coming of Christ. So when he was talking about, I see in your dream, you had this statue, its feet were made of clay and 10 toes are mixed of clay and iron. Then the legs were of iron. And then the waist was bronze and silver and gold. So they had all these different elements. Pardon?
Layers.
Yeah, all the layers. And so, but the cool part of the story is, but then a rock not cut with human hands comes and flies down, smashes the toes, and the whole statue comes crumbling down. And that's still not the best part. The best part, and anybody can read this, it then says, then the rock grew and covered the entire earth. So what is that? The 10 provinces of Rome? Very good chance that that's what that was. And that was the time Christ, who was that rock, came and landed and is filling the whole earth, and he's not done. And so in my mind, the wise men knew something was going to happen. They knew that they were watching politics too, because politics played a major role in this too, in reading what was going on. So we can't write that all off. Is it connected directly to the birth of Christ? I would never have thought that, but I can't unsee it now. So that's one of my joy boy rides that I love, that I've connected Christmas to that story and prophecy that no one ever told me about. It's so exciting. Anyway,
That's good.
there's my rant.
That's true.
Done.
That's good. Well, would you like another controversy?
Yes, please.
Go for it.
Because it's fair. This one is relatively new in that our friend down there in Georgia, Andy Stanley, gets himself in some hot water, and he just recently was talking about only 2 miracles that
Matter.
Christians really hold on to: creation, what we believe about God, and the resurrection, what we believe about Jesus, informs us about Jesus. Which brings us to the virgin birth.
You left that out?
Well, I'm bringing that up to say that I was taught that I had to believe the virgin birth in order to be a follower of Christ. I mean, you have to believe that. And I think there's a lot of Christianity that still teaches that. Now, I'm not saying I don't believe it. I'm just saying that
You weren't told it was on the list of things you had to believe.
Oh yeah,
Right?
The virgin birth, because of course this was he had to be free of the sin nature as he was born. So
that's where that all ties back to. Correct.
Yeah. So that theologically that's where that came to. But William Barclay, who I love his devotions and study, he didn't really believe the virgin birth story as is taught by many. So, but by most of Western Christianity anyway. I don't know what it's like in the East, but I just thought that was maybe a topic to toss it out there for a little conversation.
Is it a fundamental
Yeah.
need to believe in that? I would say no.
I don't think so either.
And however, I think that once we understand or once we come to a place of freedom where we don't have to have certainty, it makes it ironically much easier to rest than the fact that I don't know, but I'm also not incapable of believing it could be the case too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and some younger people exploring the faith, this is an immediate
barrier.
It is a barrier, and it's a point of mockery. What's used by many anti-theists to draw people away. It's similar, in my view, to the 6-day creation thing. Do you have to believe the 6-day creation thing and the Kinam, all the, everything that you find later, all, stands on the book of Genesis. But so I think it's at least worth having a conversation that a person doesn't have to believe the virgin birth in order to begin to follow Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah. Completely agree.
We got to remember that it's Jesus, the Holy Spirit, God the Father, that actually draws us into actually believing anything. So if we have something shoved on us that we must believe, I think a red flag needs to go up. It may be true and it may not, but a red flag goes up when we're forced to just take it in and without questioning it and believe it because somebody tells us this is a foundation. I love, to me, I believe the virgin birth story, and I'm okay if it turns out to not be true. So what? I think Jesus coming as a baby and growing and teaching and doing the miracles, and then dying for us. To me, that's huge. And then even the story of the Old Testament pointing to him, I find more hope in it. It's the micro details. It's cultural. We're culturalized into trying to be right and have clear cubby holes of full explanations and mysteries left out. I think there's far more mystery in the Christmas
story. I think you leave it in the mystery category because I'm simply saying it's something maybe to consider as we share Christianity and discuss Christianity with particularly a younger generation that's got access to all kinds of information. Yep. And that's like Bill said, it's often a barrier to them coming to their.
Well, I think it's one of those, and again, this would be the progression of, I hope, would be maturity with many believers. And as an immature believer, maybe you believe it because it's just so exciting, but then you're going to progress through different stages of doubt. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. That's normal. You're going to question. You're going to seek certainty at times in your life, and you're going to grasp onto elements that are certainty. And truth be told, the entire idea of the virgin birth is too wild to believe with any sense of pragmatism. It is. I'll say it. It's illogical. It doesn't make any sense. It would have to be completely miraculous and transcendent from anything that is testable or repeatable. And at some point in faith, and which is the opposite of certainty. Again, and with maturity, I think sometimes we release our certainties and we release our desires to have solid, concrete, logical answers for everything. And we can enter that place of mystery once again. And again, to me, that kind of bookends the experience in my journey, where I'm open-handed with it. I don't have to have it, but I can also have grace for people who aren't where I've trudged through. And yet the certainty on the front end that you have to believe it or else, that's just a different state of immaturity.
Mm-hmm. And the whole Christmas story is part of where the metaphysical meets the physical.
Absolutely.
The unseen meets the seen. So the whole Christmas story introduces us to an idea that there's a realm that we just are, it's beyond us, that we don't understand. that comes into our world and tells us that there's so much more to this world than what we see.
Yeah. I imagine the faith of those magi making that trip with all that stuff. What certainty did they have? Or was it hope?
Yeah.
It's no different. And then they went to the wrong place. And then Herod was chicken to go. So he sent them off and told them to come back. Like, there's just something deep about who these non-Christians were. Right? Christians didn't even exist at that point. But the fact that they followed a light that was true to them. And we need to recognize that for other people too, that if God gives them a light that doesn't sound like what we've been taught, to back off and let mystery run things, not us, because we're not the ones who reveal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do want just a minute left. Oh, sorry. Did you have something?
No, go ahead.
I did want to talk about, we got just a second, but the most unsung person in every nativity story, all the little kids, when you get them out, what's the character we all love the most? The
drummer
innkeeper,
boy.
right?
Oh,
the innkeeper. He's like you got to have an innkeeper, right? In every nativity play. And yet, do you know he doesn't exist? I'll read my post and then we can close it here. You know the biggest problem with the nativity story than the innkeeper? He doesn't exist. He is a made-up, inserted apparition of the Christmas narrative. You are not an innkeeper who has the power to reject Jesus from dwelling inside you. The Greek word kataluma simply means resting or lodging place. It was the comfortable guest room sleeping area of an ancient Jewish home. Jesus wasn't born rejected and outside from the home. He was just born in the lowest, most humble, unexpected recesses of the home, where the family kept their livestock for sustenance and for sacrifice. Jesus was never removed or disconnected from the home. He was just hidden in a place you'd never expect to find a newborn child. You are not an innkeeper. You are the house. Wow. Jesus is birthed in the most unexpected, humble, dark, musty recesses of you, waiting to be discovered. The innkeeper is a myth. He does not exist.
Nice.
And with that, we're done. Thank you. That was really good. I'm looking that up.
Yeah.
Until next time, thank you for watching Still Growing in Grace. Join me next time on Still Growing in Grace. Enjoy previous episodes by downloading our podcast at growingingrace.ca. If this show's been an encouragement to you, consider making a donation today. For our Canadian link, visit growingingrace.ca, and for our USA link, visit eschurch.com. Your donation will help us continue spreading really good news. Thank you again for tuning in to Still Growing in Grace.